have heard of a land on a faraway strand. In the Bible the story is told, where cares never come, never darkness nor gloom, and nothing shall ever grow old. In that beautiful land on the faraway strand, no storms with their blast ever frown. The street, I am told, is paved with pure gold, and the sun, it shall never go down. There are evergreen trees that been blowing in the breeze, and their fruitage is brighter than gold.
All right, so Matthew 12 is where we want to start this morning, which I've simply designated as a chapter dealing with authority over what Moses delivered, the authority that Jesus had over the law. We'll read very briefly, I guess, the first 7 or 8 verses. At that time, Jesus passed through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick and eat some of the heads of grain. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "See, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." Now, I'm going to stop right there. Back up just a little bit. We're back in Matthew 7 again. And do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Imagine yourself as being hungry and in a grain field, and there's ripe grain right there, and you reach out and pluck it. Is this how you would want someone to react to you for doing something that you felt was essential? By the way, Jesus is going to be real clear about what they did in just a moment, making an application of the law very different than their application. So they're making a mistake in application of this law. But notice how Jesus does this. See, your disciples doing what is not lawful. That's their claim. They are breaking this law. He said to them, "Haven't you read what David did when he and those who were with him were hungry, how he entered the house of God? They were at the bread of the presence, and which is not lawful for him or for those who are with him to eat, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that on Sabbath days the priests in the temple violate the Sabbath and are innocent?" Now, these are two different kinds of illustrations. First off, none of them would have condemned David. And yet David did something that actually was a transgression of the letter of the law. And then the priests minister in the temple every Sabbath. And if their application of the Sabbath is correct, then the priests are doing something wrong as well. Where should the priests be according to their application of the Sabbath? They should be at home doing no work. But then who would be ministering in the temple? And that's the point that Jesus is making. When God gave them the obligation to minister in the temple, he didn't say minister in the temple every day except the Sabbath day. And so we've got competing instructions from God to the priests. And if it's their time to be in the temple ministering, what did the priests do? Well, they ministered. And Jesus says, hey, are they breaking the Sabbath? No, they're innocent. Notice his choice of words. I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If the temple and service in the temple was enough to override the Sabbath, then certainly God overrides the Sabbath. In another place, the Bible will tell us that when someone subjects others to something, it is apparent that the one who does the subjecting is himself what? Not in subjection. So listen to what he says. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. That is an Old Testament quote. If you knew what God meant when he said, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. What they did was not a transgression of the Sabbath. Their accusation was that they broke the Sabbath law. He comes to the point where he says, no, you've condemned the innocent. By the way, I just spent 8 weeks talking about how God views condemning the innocent. How does God view that? Not very kindly. In fact, he says he will in no wise forget those who condemn the innocent. You would not have, if you knew what God said, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord over the Sabbath. And that last statement is the key to everything that's going on here and why this is written in the Gospel of Matthew. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Where did the Sabbath come from? Okay, it came from God through, it came from God, and there's actually 2 different things that we're told in Scripture that it's associated with, 2 different periods of rest. One of them goes all the way back to creation. God, in 6 days he created the world, on the 7th day he rested. I think Exodus 7 makes that argument. But God gave this through Moses and the 10 Commandments and what we call the Law of Moses, right? That's where this comes from. The whole Sabbath thing and all the restrictions associated with it came from God through Moses. Jesus says, I am Lord of Sabbath. What does that mean? He's claiming to be God. He's the giver of the law of the Sabbath. He has authority over the Sabbath, therefore. And they need not question his assessment that these men are innocent. He's not appealing to precedent here, like so many people think. That's not the point of the 2 illustrations. The point of the 2 illustrations is showing how inconsistent in judgment these men are. Where they would not have condemned David, they are condemning his disciples. When David was actually doing something, his disciples were not. Not only are they inconsistent in their application, they're just wrong. It's an assertion of his authority. And by the way, if he's Lord of the Sabbath, who else is he Lord over? Those people who came to him complaining. The issue is not what did Moses say any longer. Jesus doesn't say what did Moses say. He says, I have the right to define what Moses' law requires. I have the authority to tell you that what they are doing is not a transgression of the Sabbath. In another place, there's a record in where this is where it comes to. Was man made for the Sabbath, or was Sabbath made for man? Now, what is the obvious answer to that question? Sabbath was made for man. What was made first? Man or the Sabbath? Man. Now, God wasn't sitting in heaven before he created the world and all things in it going, you know what? I got this idea for the seventh day rest period where something, I don't know what yet, is going to rest on the seventh day. Now, what can I make that will be able to honor that Sabbath day? That's not the order of things as it's presented to us. God made man in his own image to have fellowship with man. Man broke that fellowship with him, and now he is trying to devise things to train them and get them back into fellowship with him. And the Sabbath is one of those tools that he has created to help teach them to discipline themselves and to follow his commandments so that they can get themselves back into a place and have fellowship with him again. The Sabbath is made for man. Man is not made for the Sabbath. So, which one is more important? The man or the Sabbath? The man's more important. It was only made for a certain time and for a certain purpose. And he is saying, you also need to realize that what God said is, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. What is God teaching when he said that through the prophet, I desire mercy and not sacrifice? Is he teaching that he doesn't want them to engage in sacrifices? No. For hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after the prophet said that, they continued to offer animal sacrifices at the command and requirement of God. He is not saying, I do not want sacrifices. So, what is he saying when he says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice? That mercy is more important, that the sacrifice without mercy is useless. Yep. But their heart is far from me. Yep. Excellent observation. We have to understand the line of reasoning that Jesus is employing here, and what he's ultimately teaching them is what is stated in the thesis statement in the conclusion. The Son of Man is Lord of Sabbath. And if he's Lord of the Sabbath, then he's Lord of everything in the law of Moses. And if he is the Lord over the law of Moses, then he is certainly the Lord over those who are subject to the law of Moses. And this is clearly a claim to his authority, to his position, and to why they should listen to his assessment and judgment about these things. Chapter 17. We've looked at chapter 17 a couple of times in this class already. We're going to do it again. I'm not going to read it all. This is the transfiguration scene, the beginning of Matthew 17. It plays a role in what we're discussing here today. So Moses is not just alluded to by Matthew in chapter 17 as he is in some other places. And Moses is not even just talked about, but now Moses makes an actual appearance. Behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Who's him? Jesus. All right, so let's talk about Moses and Elijah for just a moment. And let's do them backwards. Elijah first. Who was Elijah? He was a prophet. He wasn't just a prophet, but he was what? He was the great prophet. Interestingly enough, he was also a shadow of another prophet. We spent a lot of time a couple of weeks ago talking about Moses being a shadow of the Christ. Elijah was also a shadow of someone. Who was it? John the Baptist. So we've got Elijah there, and we've got Moses there. Moses represented whom? The law. So we got the representative of the prophets and the representative of the law, all the prophets foreshadowing John and Moses foreshadowing Jesus, and they are talking with Jesus, who has been transfigured before them and is now seen in a glorious state. But the defining moment is not the scene. It's not the people involved. It's not the transfiguration. By the way, how long had Elijah and Moses been dead? And yet there they stood talking with Jesus. And they knew who they were. In fact, the disciples, one of them said what? Yeah, well, hey, it's great that we're here. Let's build a tabernacle. One for Moses and one for Elijah and one for you. It's not their presence. That's not what's important. Verse 5 is what's important. When the voice comes from heaven and says, "This is my beloved son," listen to him. Now, the implication is what? It's no longer time to listen to Elijah. It's no longer time to listen to Moses. It's time to listen to Jesus. You listen to him. Now, that harkens way back to what Moses had prophesied in Deuteronomy 18:15. There's going to be a prophet that arises like me. To him shall you listen. God says, right there out of heaven, this is him. Listen to it. And then, verse 8, they saw no one but Jesus. It's not incidental. Moses appears, but then he goes away. And Jesus remains. And what's going on here is the focus is being narrowed. And now all the focus is on Jesus. It's no longer about Moses and the prophets. It's about Jesus. And in fact, we learn later that everything that Moses and the prophets wrote was about Jesus. And so the focus is being brought squarely upon the Son of God, the Son of Man, the Lord of the Sabbath. This is who it's all about. Now, then Matthew 23 comes into this discussion. Moses' name is invoked again by extension, because the people that he's talking to about it, I'd love to spend as much time as it would take to cover all of this chapter. It's one of my favorite chapters in the book of Matthew, a rather scathing rebuke of these people. But these men are now sitting in the seat of Moses. Okay, what is the seat of Moses? Well, what did he do? He gave the law. He didn't just give the law. He also judged the law, made determinations about how and where it applied, which is exactly what these men do. They read and interpret the law and make decisions about who's guilty, who's not guilty, what's right and what's wrong, what people should do, what they shouldn't do. They have seated themselves in the seat of Moses. They are now on the leading edge of authority in this system. And he introduces them by introducing Moses' position as a point of confrontation. The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. It's an authority claim. He's laying the foundation for his authority claim. Look at verse 3 of chapter 23. So do and observe whatever they tell you. Does he question the authority of the law? Not at all. They're sitting in Moses' seat, and as long as they are speaking the things that Moses wrote by inspiration, he says, you do and observe whatever they tell you. But then he says, what? But not the works that they do. Two realities are being held together. What Moses delivered remains authoritative and binding. Those who claimed his authority are failing to uphold it. That's what he's showing. That's what he's telling them. Okay, the law itself, that's from God. What they're doing, not the law. You do what they tell you to do when they read from the law of God. You don't do what they do. They possess the seat. They don't reflect the standard. And this leads to some exposure. Verse 4, they burden others. They put heavy burdens on them. Verses 5 through 7, they seek positions of honor and respect among men. Down in verse 23, they neglect the weightier matters of the law, paying attention to the peripheral things, but neglecting the weightier things. And the implication of all this is completely unavoidable. Claiming Moses' authority is not the same thing as being faithful to what Moses delivered. Two different things. And in this context, Jesus speaks not as a commentator. He's not saying, hey, let me offer my opinion. He speaks as the one who judges those who sit in Moses' seat. That's the point of this chapter. They sit in the seat of Moses and they answer to me. And if they answer to him, then who else answers to him? Everyone that answers to them. Remember, he started off by saying, do what they say. They had authority, but he had greater authority. And where they failed, which was in applying these things properly, he didn't. The book of Acts confirms all of these things. Acts chapter 3. Again, I'd love to go through the whole sermon. We don't have time. Look at verse 22 of Acts chapter 3. Moses said, the Lord God will raise up for you a prophet like me. You shall listen to him. Very, very explicit here. The conclusion is very clear. Jesus is the prophet. We get to Acts chapter 7 and the sermon that's recorded there. In verse 37, this is the Moses who said, God will raise up for you a prophet like me. Now look at verse 39. Our fathers refused to obey him. And then, when you take this whole sermon in its context, Stephen is drawing the connection. The one like Moses has come, and the same resistance that our fathers gave to Moses, we're giving to him. Our fathers refused to listen to Moses, and we're not listening to the one who is greater than Moses. This is when he says, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised of heart. By the way, what did this sermon get him? It got him dead. That's what it got him. They didn't miss what he was saying. They understood clearly what he was saying. And so this is not incidental. This is not just a nice little story or a historical account of something that happened. This is the scripture saying what Matthew said. This is how it plays out. So we got this pattern of rejecting God's messenger, and that pattern persists. The question then remains for the reader of Matthew is what? Am I going to resist? All of this argument's being laid out for me and showing me why Jesus matters. His birth, his nature, his purpose, his teaching, all of it pointing to the same thing. What is it? That he is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that he is the one that we need to listen to and pay attention to. So the question then becomes, what am I going to be? Am I going to be like the Jews of old, or like the people of Stephen's time, stiff-necked, uncircumcised of heart, unwilling to listen to Jesus, or am I instead going to listen to him? Yes, sir.
The fact that this seems to be kind of a recurring theme really seems to punctuate the importance later on. The book of Hebrews feels almost exclusive about how Jesus, the Christ, is superior to Moses and superior even to Abraham. One who is great is here.
Right.
Yeah, it comes down to us. How does the Bible mean? And what am I?
Yep. And the last thing I want to point out, we're out of time. Last thing I want to point out is I want you to notice the shift. We're not focused on the person Jesus anymore. What are we focused on exclusively? The authority and teaching. And that is an important shift. The person of Jesus was offered as a foundation for which we should do what? Listen to the teaching of Jesus. And the focus becomes the teaching, doing what he says, viewing it with the same authority that we view the law. We know the Ten Commandments came from God. So does what Jesus said. All right, got to stop. Appreciate everybody's participation and presence this morning, especially those that are visiting with us and it's your first time here. Sorry you're dropping in the middle of a class.
I have heard